Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started with today's house programming, we'd like to share a few housekeeping notes. Today's program will be a series of presentations and conversations, with the remaining time at the end of today's program reserved for Q&A and conversation with attendees. During the question and answer portion of the conversation, you're encouraged to ask questions by typing your questions, and at the very end, we'll encourage you to unmute yourselves to have a conversation. The chat function to ask questions and have comments is found at the bottom of your screen. We do ask that you remain muted when not speaking in order to alleviate feedback. Should you have any technical issues, please do not hesitate to message us via the chat function so that we can ensure that you have the best experience. Please also note that today's program is being recorded for archival purposes. And now I'll hand it over to Elizabeth Agro for our official introductions. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Lindsay. I want to first say thank you, Lindsay and Linnea, for coordinating this two-day symposium and for all your technical support. Without it, we couldn't have done it, so I appreciate you being partners. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are located on the lands of the Lenni Lenape people. We pay respect to the Lenape peoples past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout the Lenape diaspora. Welcome to our program today. I'm Elizabeth Agro, the Nancy M. McNeil Curator of American Modern and Contemporary Craft and Decorative Arts at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. In January, I offered to host CraftNOW's Cultures of Making Symposium in the Philadelphia Museum of Art's Perlman Building Auditorium. By the end of April, it was clear that the symposium had to pivot to a virtual format, dashing our hope for us to be together in a physical space. The committee worked together to reimagine this event, dividing it into two afternoons, today and last week on October 30th. The theme of craft and activism was selected specifically in order to fortify us all during these difficult days surrounding the election. During the symposium, we intended to offer an opportunity to engage our hands in making in an effort to thwart any unpent feelings of stress and anxiety. We all know that craft has a history of going hand in hand with activism and advocacy, but it can also be a salve and a source of meditation. Impossible to recreate this virtually, we encourage you to check out the wide variety of craft kits sold by Wild Hand, a Philadelphia-based community that believes in magic of fibercraft, bringing people together who share a vision of an imaginative and just world. Wild Hand is offering a discount to all of our attendees through their online store, and I'll place their code and information in the chat for those who are interested. There is no substitute for actually being together, but I ask you to indulge me. Let's all transport ourselves to the museum's auditorium in the Perlman Building. Seated together, I'm standing at the podium in front of you now, and let me set up our conversation for today. A hotbed for workshops of all craft media dating back to 1751, craft has deep roots in Philadelphia. Craft as an art form is part of our city's identity, past and present. Philadelphia Museum of Art is a distinguished leader in the field of modern contemporary craft and shapes this rapid evolving field that is critical to its continued mission today. The multiplicity that makes up the Philadelphia craft community drives this art form to proliferate, thrive, and morph, redefining and blurring the boundaries of craft with each passing year. The museum and its principal stakeholders in Philadelphia's craft community are the power behind an intensified current, galvanizing Philadelphia as a craft capital. Each November, the Philadelphia Museum of Art Craft Show and CraftNOW, in collaboration with our craft community, band together to demonstrate how craft is embraced and celebrated throughout our city. Before handing over the baton to Leila Cartier, I encourage you to visit the Philadelphia Museum of Art's Craft Show, which is presented virtually beginning today through Sunday, November 8th, and details will also be placed in the chat. I encourage you to support the many artists who are showcased, and in doing so, support my museum's most important fundraiser. The event is free this year, and we only ask that you make a donation if you are so inclined. In these fiscally difficult times, we need you more than ever. Thank you and enjoy today's proceedings. Leila, I'm handing it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I could not be more grateful that you approached me to co-host this year's symposium, and we have had this occasion to work together. I equally would like to thank the Philadelphia Museum of Art's affinity group, TechNA, for sponsoring this symposium. TechNA's programming focuses on international craft and is always very dynamic. So on behalf of everyone at CraftNOW, I will say it is an honor to be recorded among your events. If I may speak a moment about what brings us here, the organization CraftNOW Philadelphia was founded 6 years ago to unite, support, and promote this exceptional talent among us and the importance of craft to the largest possible audience. An example of one of our recent projects is our second publication, Craft Capital, Philadelphia's Cultures of Making, released globally this spring. We do this work because it is our core belief that craft is a great unifier and convener. People from all walks of life, all ethnicities, age groups, and neighborhoods can and do make things. At CraftNOW, we work together to demonstrate how makers and their supporting institutions are important for this community and they generate value. This symposium series is part of the Craft Month activities we host every November. Today, we are examining the craft through the theme, Cultures of Making, which we borrowed from the subtitle of the book I just mentioned to highlight the many ways research, activism, and connection develop out of craft practices all over the country. We also have a couple more programs on the horizon. Tomorrow, on Saturday, November 7th, we will be hosting Philadelphia's biggest free art class. We have created 500 take-home kits and distributed them to galleries and access centers across the city. If you have an elementary age child that would be interested, please visit our website to follow along. Even if you don't have a kit, we have listed all of the materials you're going to need. And one last thing I would like to mention before we start, it is our own annual fundraiser coming up this year to include a special auction that is currently open for bidding. We will be closing the auction with a live program next Saturday, November 14th. Our past symposium keynote speakers, Glenn Adamson, Michelle Fisher, Roberto Lugo, and Abraham Thomas are planning to join us. And this is going to be a casual virtual gathering to include some scholarly information, as well as a few entertaining surprises. To learn more about CraftNOW programs, please visit our website, craftnowphila.org, and consider a donation to help us continue our work. With that, we have given all of our official remarks. Any latecomers have had a chance to sign on, and all of you have been able to settle in, and I am very excited to begin this afternoon's program. As a reminder, we ask that you remain muted until the end, at which point we will be inviting you to all unmute yourselves and have your videos on so that we can share a moment of conversation together. We also suggest using speaker view during presentations. Our presenters will be eager to hear your questions, so please put them in the chat along with your name and where you are joining us from so that we may share them during the afternoon. Our first presentation is Crafting Public Ritual with keynote Vashti DuBois of the Colored Girls Museum. Vashti has held a number of leadership positions over her 30-year career, working primarily on issues impacting girls and women of color. Organizations where she has worked include the Free Library of Philadelphia, Treehouse Books, the Historic Church of the Advocate, Children's Art Carnival in New York City, Haymarket People's Fund in Boston, Congresso Girls Center, and the Leeway Foundation. Launched in 2015, the Colored Girls Museum honors the stories, experiences, and history of colored girls of the African diaspora. It is the first institution of its kind and offers visitors a multidisciplinary experience of memoir set in a residential space. I was fortunate to hear Vashti present in a series of object stories at the American Craft Council Conference in Philadelphia last October. She spoke about a seemingly ordinary object, presenting a handmade doll, and how such deeply personal objects are submitted to the museum by the colored girl herself because they are representative of a meaningful aspect of her personal story. The museum draws our attention to and gives import not only to these objects, but the stories and experiences of the individuals that own them, the collective impact of these histories. Vashti writes, Barbara Bullock an internationally celebrated artist and educator based in Philadelphia, said of her practice, "I work with the paper until the paper forgets that it's paper." Her approach to creating reminds us that we are always shaping and crafting reality. It reminds us that craft is itself a complex communication system. Who defines craft? How does their definition determine its outcome or uses? How does our language limit or expand the potential and purpose of work that finds itself in this category? In this keynote, Crafting Public Ritual, I will invite us to imagine and reimagine the alchemy of craft, its politics, its poetry, and its purpose to all of us at a time like this. Vashti, thank you for being here with us today and starting this program.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, friends. So a video is running, which has no sound, so don't be distracted by that. I want to thank everyone from the Craft Symposium Council for this invitation this afternoon. And I want to be completely honest that given the collective and world challenges of this week, combined with the personal challenges in my own familial life, not unrelated to the things that are going on in the world, it is significant that I am here today at all. So I decided to sort of give us a context for how I want you to think about how I will talk about the work of the Colored Girls Museum and how it is that we express this idea of what it means to craft public ritual. So I want to read something from Sonia Renee Taylor. I urge you, if you have an opportunity to get her book, to check out her website and to dig more deeply into what she's talking about, as I think it has great relevance for all of us at a time like this. Some of us may be in this space today, celebrating the recent outcome of this election. And while let me just read this intro. So take a minute and just sit with this for a minute, because this is opening this day of our discussions of craft. And it may seem unrelated to you, but I promise you that it is not. The body is not an apology. Began as a conversation between two friends. Nastasia feared she had an unintended pregnancy. And when Sonia asked why Nastasia had chosen to have unprotected sex with a casual partner, Nastasia shared that her cerebral palsy made it difficult to be sexual. And thus she did not feel entitled to ask her sexual partner to use a condom. Sonia's response was swift. Your body is not an apology. You do not use it to say, sorry for my disability. Sonia and Natasha created what Sonia refers to as a transformational portal by presencing three critical elements: radical honesty, radical vulnerability, and radical empathy. It was from this powerful act that the body is not an apology was born. It will be difficult to hold on to all of that, but as I talk a little about our work, what should not be difficult to hold on to as a phrase, as an idea, in this moment that we are all sitting in today, this idea that the body is not an apology. The Colored Girls Museum celebrated her 5th birthday, September 11th of this year. The Colored Girls Museum is in a 3-story Victorian house in Germantown, Philadelphia. a house that is still inhabited by me. There are 7 rooms in this 3-story Victorian. And when the Colored Girls Museum opened in 2015, the invitation to ordinary Black women and girls was to submit an object that was of significance to them into each of the rooms in this 3-story Victorian home. And then to invite 2 to 5 other ordinary Black women or girls to submit an object that was significant to them. In doing so, what we chose to do here at the Colored Girls Museum was to enter into a ritual of self-care and self-purpose. The Colored Girls Museum, so that you know, does not misunderstand the uses of the word colored. We understand its uses in this country, and we understand its uses in South Africa. And what I would like you to know is that what we think about when we name ourselves the Colored Girls Museum is we are thinking about all the ways in which Black women and girls are colored by everybody. How the world takes its Crayola crayon and it colors us too assertive, too loud, too needy, just colors us. And so this idea of creating a museum that celebrates the ordinary Black woman and girl is an idea that really sits inside of a very ordinary set of circumstances. That when we are, as individual people, seen and heard and held, we are able to move forward in the world in a really powerful way with our ordinary selves. And I and the Colored Girls Museum really believe that in order to make that a real possibility, ritual has to be at play, because ritual is always at play. When we do the thing that we do over and over and over again, we are bringing a kind of power and sacred purpose to all that we touch. As you see the images in front of you, what you see are images that have transitioned over time in the Colored Girls Museum. In our first show, the Colored Girls Museum opened for business. This museum disguised herself as a bed and breakfast, because were you to know that she were a Colored Girls Museum, our concern, our very real concern, was that someone might do her harm. But it would be okay for Black women and girls to position themselves as a place of hospice. So she presents to you as a bed and breakfast. In the second show for the Colored Girls Museum, we called ourselves in that show a good night's sleep. And with a good night's sleep, each of the rooms in the Colored Girls Museum became a different kind of sleep chamber. As we thought about and talked about the ways in which 400 years of sleeplessness was impacting the overall well-being and quality of life of Black women and girls. What are the specific consequences on the body of Black women and girls when you do not get a good night's sleep? And that good night's sleep is more than one night. It is 400 years. In turning each of these rooms into a sleep chamber, our intention was to provide the ordinary Black woman and girl visiting the Colored Girls Museum with multiple opportunities and options for how she might take something from what we offered to get and gain a good night's sleep, because we know that without a good night's sleep, you can't dream. Without a good night's sleep, you can't heal. Without a good night's sleep, you can't remember. Without a good night's sleep, you can't time travel. So a good night's sleep is essential. In our third year of the Colored Girls Museum, we became the Colored Girls Hospital. So each of the rooms in the Colored Girls Museum was named after a space that you might find in a hospital. Triage, the apothecary, the reception area, the pain management suite, the urgent care facility, the historic record. And in each of these rooms, what we asked our artists to do as part of the practice of the Colored Girls Museum, as part of the ritual of installation for the Colored Girls Museum, was to think about how each of these names provided an opportunity to give the colored girl the urgent care she needed before she needed it. So how is it that we think about and offer a pain management system before we're in critical pain? What do we already know about healing that's installed in the space in the museum that was then called the apothecary? So what are all the ways in which we can care for Black women and girls? We can provide urgent care whenever we need it for all the times that we need it. The next show that we did transformed this space, again, calling upon ordinary Black women and girls to take a room in this space and to think with us about this public health crisis. There are 76,000 Black women and girls currently missing in the United States of America. That is to say, we do not know whether they are dead or alive. We do not know whether they were run away, whether they ran away. We do not know whether they're victims of sex trafficking, domestic violence. We don't know. And most people don't know that 76,000 Black women and girls are actually missing. And so to have that conversation, but to also hold that painful knowledge, the Colored Girls Museum became an excavation site for that exhibition. Once again, calling upon ordinary Black women and girls to think with us and work with this space, to invite us to think, how is it that 76,000 bodies can go missing and there be no public outcry? And what we discover through the work that we do with that exhibition, through the entries by ordinary Black women and girls, because you don't have to be an incredible artist to come into the collective that is the Colored Girls Museum. You don't have to be an artist at all. What we ask is that what you enter into this space is an object that is significant to you as it relates to the story that we are talking about. Because what we understand is that it is the gathering of the objects and the artifacts that create what it is that we are up to at the Colored Girls Museum, which is safe space and sanctuary. And the last show for the Colored Girls Museum after In Search of the Colored Girl was actually our tribute, a psalm for Toni Morrison, our celebration of the late great word warrior Toni Morrison after her transition, where once again in this museum, we named rooms after one or two of Toni Morrison's books in order to celebrate her and also call for her blessings upon this institution. And part one of that show opened in 2019. But by 2020, we all understood that none of our cultural institutions were going to be able to open and receive visitors as we had been. And so that Toni Morrison exhibit will be leaving the Colored Girls Museum, but she sits here still. While in response to the moment that we're in right now, the Colored Girls Museum offers on our Instagram page a project called For a Time Like This. A time like this, once again, invites ordinary colored girls to invite other Black women and girls that they know to submit an object that has been significant to them during this time, during these triple pandemics. The pandemic that brought us this virus, the pandemic that brings us anti-Blackness, and the pandemic that brings us all kinds of economic hell. And if you look at that Instagram page, what you will notice is the gathering of all of these ordinary objects submitted by ordinary Black women and girls, and how in looking at them, we get to remember the power of the ordinary things in our lives and how they care for us. How they care for us personally, but also how they hold us in community together. One of the powerful things about this community grassroots museum is that she allows us not just to think about the power of ordinary people, the power of ordinary Black women and girls. And we focus on Black women and girls because Black women and girls are at the bottom of most things. And one of the advantages to being at the bottom of most things is that you have a different kind of vision. You also come to understand for yourself the power of your own ability to do your own storytelling. This possibility of not having to wait for someone else to say, your story is a story that must be told. And that, you know, many people will say, well, of what use is a Colored Girls Museum to me if I'm not a Black woman, if I'm not a Black girl? And one of the things that we know in this life is that in order to be universal, we have to be specific. And the more specific we are, the more we're able to see the connections that we have among and between each other. I really wanted to start this conversation, this opening of the Craft Council as I talk about crafting public ritual. I hope that you understand by what I've explained our shows are and the way that we do them, how we are always here at the museum crafting a ritual. That the doing and undoing of every single show that we have here at the museum is a way of making this museum responsive and responsible to the constituency that we say that we serve. We are, every time we take up a show, not just undoing the show that's been here before, but also undoing what it is that so many of us have come to know, not just about museum, but about the role of craft and what we call crafting in the healing of our communities. How when all of our work, all of the things that we hold sacred are in conversation with each other, how those conversations position us to create a new world. How at a time like this, it is challenging to talk about my privilege as a Black woman, because many people are accustomed to hearing this idea of privilege as it relates to white folks. But I submit to all of you today, because many of us who are on this particular Zoom call would consider that we are creatives, that we are progressives, and that we want nothing more than to have a just and equitable world. What I've been sitting with since Tuesday is, what is it that we're willing to give up in order to have that? How is it that we are willing to imagine, to like rethink our own understanding of ritual in our own lives, ritual as a strategy for being with one another? What are we willing to shift and to change? What are we willing to offer? How will we move forward now? Understanding, having to acknowledge that we are a country that is so deeply, deeply, deeply divided. How it is that there have been no winners today. How will we recover from this? And for those of us who consider that we are advocates, we are cultural ambassadors, we are facilitators, we are healers, what are we thinking about today? How will our ritual change today? Our personal and our collective rituals. What will we offer into this conversation that has been raised? Or will we assume that we won something? When I consider that maybe by March of 2021, the Colored Girls Museum will be able to once again reopen her doors. She will once again be able to invite a public in. How in creating this museum, we really are always arguing with this idea of that which is private, which has been made public, that which is public, which is now private. How as a country, our private shame now belongs to all of us, to the world, really. And from our corner of the world, your corner of the world, the Colored Girls Museum, this craft collective, what work can we do? Of what importance is it that we continue to do any of the things that are in front of us right now? Is our work essential? And if it is, how will we offer it into this scarred place that has opened up before us? I began talking about Sonia's work, about radical honesty, radical vulnerability, and radical empathy, because what I was prepared to talk about seems so out of step with the moment that we're in right now and the feeling that I'm in today. And I suppose that what I'm hoping is, as we move forward to have these conversations about craft, you know, when I think of craft, I think of home. I think of all the ways in which all of us are always crafting and creating something, and how that ritual of crafting, whether we're crafting a painting or crafting a poem, imagining a building that we'll design or address, how the work of crafting is itself a ritual that has the potential to set us free or to keep us as we are and where we are. When I accepted this invitation, I was aware that I would be speaking hopefully after we had learned who the new president of the United States would be. And when I realized the date, I almost took back my acceptance, because I realized how hard it would be for me, a Black woman, to be speaking into this space. I didn't want to let you off the hook by being the Black woman that you heard from, and I didn't want to let me off the hook. The Colored Girls Museum is a public ritual for the protection, praise, and grace of the ordinary colored girl. She became that because we felt strongly that it was not enough to call for the protection, praise, and grace of ordinary Black women and girls. We felt strongly that we would have to create a ritual that we would continue to pour into over time so that she could have that protection, praise, and grace. And we will still be a public ritual for her protection, praise, and grace. But what we will hold now is the protection, praise, and grace of the world community that she occupies. Because the truth is, she cannot have her protection, praise, and grace if we do not all have protection, praise, and grace. This is not the talk I planned or the one that you intended, but I think that it's the one that is necessary right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Vashti. We did speak this summer about how uncertain this week would be for all of us, and I sincerely thank you for being here with us today and sharing the story and importance of the Colored Girls Museum and the work that it does here in Philadelphia and what it means to be innovative in what you are doing. I wondered if I might start with a question and also invite anyone that has questions for Vashti to please put them in the chat. Elizabeth and I are going to share them with her for the next few minutes. I wondered if you might share with us, if you have a memory on the top of your head, maybe a specific object and how an interaction with a handmade object in the Colored Girls Museum led to what you were talking about in terms of its story and its presentation in the museum was transformative and healing.
That's always a difficult question, because I think that we all feel like, you know, everything here has, you know, just, you know, when you, I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about an ordinary doctor's bag that now sits in what was, when it was submitted to this museum for urgent care, the Colored Girls Museum's hospital. And, you know, at first glance, it's just a bag. But when you talk about how that bag came to be here, it was submitted by a Black woman. Her father was a physician, and he was a physician at a time when there weren't a whole lot of Black physicians. And he passed that bag on to his daughter, who was also a physician. And she was killed in a domestic violence dispute with her husband. And that bag has moved to different places in the museum over the last 4 years. You know, and people look at it, and typically because it's here now, we don't necessarily talk about some of the artifacts that have been with us for a while unless people call our attention to them. And because it's a bag, I think that one of the reasons people respond viscerally to it is that we can all think of things in our lives that seem ordinary to other people, but that are so weighted. And the other, you know, artifact artwork that I want to talk about that I have known of, it's here in the museum, but I remember when I met Michael Clements, who's the curator for the Colored Girls Museum, his tribute to the 4 girls who were killed in the 16th Street church bombing. And they are 4 vessels. It's an installation. They're 4 ceramic vessels, and there are 4 fans behind them as they appear as an installation piece. And because they're vessels, they actually come apart. The heads come off of each. And Michael talks about the importance of the vessel as a reminder that the body itself is a vessel. It's a container for important things, for memories and for stories. And the 4 girls sit at the entryway to the Colored Girls Museum. So when you come in to the first room, that's where the 4 girls are. And as we are a public ritual for protection, praise, and grace of ordinary colored girls, it's significant that they sit there. And when we talk about how it is that they've come to be here at the museum, yes, there's always a visceral reaction. It really does describe and define what we mean when we talk about being a public ritual for protection, praise, and grace. So thank you for that question.
I think it's also so important, the history you're documenting through these objects that might otherwise not get shared publicly or so openly.
The history is being documented, and also it's also activating space, because the Colored Girls Museum is in a 3-story Victorian twin that's 130 years old in Germantown, and in a now rapidly gentrifying community. So it's also, again, really, I hope, reminding us that in the middle of this, you know, I'm an ordinary Black woman, this is an ordinary house, and in the middle of all of our ordinary stories is this portal, and is this vessel for remembrance, this vessel for, you know, the telling of stories, this gateway to information and community in a way that we typically, you know, we do not think about the ordinary period. And we certainly don't necessarily think about ordinary Black women and girls and their conversations and contributions to the larger conversations of the world.
I want to read from the chat that many are saying they're feeling the loss of the thunderous applause that would normally have followed your talk. And thank you for giving us such a powerful talk and being here with us during this time.
I'll add something, give you a minute, Layla, to look at the chat. I'll just say, first of all, I'm so grateful to you for your very powerful words today. And I give you a lot of credit for pivoting. You know, we all go into these, you know, when we plan these sorts of events, they're planned months in advance. we all knew the week that we'd be at. We had no idea how, oh, well, I mean, we had different feelings or ideas of how we'd be feeling, but we had no idea how present or what our present mindset would be in this moment right now at this afternoon. So I give you a lot of credit for shifting gears and speaking very much you would have spoken from your heart anyway, but it was so powerful, and I thank you for that. What I loved most was the way that you talk about the Colored Girls Museum as a living, breathing thing, an entity. You're referring to it as if it almost is a person that this house is, and I love that aspect of it breathing, it having a heartbeat and a pulse in a way that we all work in different institutions and in different centers. We think of them as living, breathing things, but not in the way you described, and that really moved me. And I love also how the fact that you think of craft, that when you think of craft, you think of the home, and that relates also to the Colored Girls Museum, because it is your home and a home for the radical empathy and the things that you are sharing about what this project, what your museum is about. And so thank you for that.
Thank you.
I have a question that is asking, what becomes of the objects after the show they are in is over? Is there an archive that you're keeping?
The Colored Girls Museum keeps an ever-growing archive. This year, we were finally able to create the first catalog. And in this year, we'll go backtrack and we'll create a catalog of all of them. We archive everything. There'll be a digital archive as well. And and also right now, the Colored Girls Museum is preparing to work in augmented reality and virtual reality, which also allows us to think about how we're archiving in that realm as well.
This is my own question. Do you know if the work you are doing has inspired similar institutions to pop up in other communities or cities?
Well, we don't know that. We certainly know that the work of the Colored Girls Museum has inspired outposts in different kinds of ways, not necessarily work like this. I think that what we're hoping, is that, ordinary people also just begin to pay attention to like what it is that we require for our communities to feel connected and whole. Like, imagine if every community had its own community museum, like what kind of, what kind of development that would be in a community, what kind of connector that would be in a community, and how relevant, how important it is to have your own story be made significant, not by somebody else, but by you. So the Colored Girls Museum itself is designed to pop up in other spaces, and we've done that, and we will continue to do that. We create temporary outposts. We don't bring our work with us, but we work with if we're going into a space, our intention is always to know that there's stories there already. There's absolutely no need to bring what we have, because what we're interested in is being a platform for other stories.
I have a question from Betty Scarpino, who's a very well-known wood turner, and she asks, could you speak to the idea of the exposure of vulnerabilities? Is it a feeling of liberation, fear? Could you elaborate?
I can answer that. Personally, people often, upon learning that the Colored Girls Museum is in my home, they go, "Oh my God, like that's so personal." And when something really different happens that I think we can all relate to when you choose to make yourself vulnerable versus, when you have no privacy. right? So it was our collective decision to open up the doors of a private space and make it public. And in so doing, in that way, it also, it creates an interesting sort of dialogue between that which is public and private. So, I mean, I feel like it provides an opportunity to enter into a more authentic conversation. Vulnerability is like it's a step in the process, but it's not the place that you end up at. But I do think that in order to have, really deep and interesting conversations, you have to be willing to be vulnerable. Or there just isn't really any place that you can go.
Two questions about ordinary. One is, do you think there is an ordinary, or is that just the way all the details and things that make each person special become papered over? Is your work about peeling back that paper to show how the ordinary is special? So let's start with that question, then I'll ask the second ordinary.
So I often have this conversation, with one of the folks in leadership of the Colored Girls Museum about, because I always say I'm ordinary. And he says, you're not ordinary. And I believe that I am. The issue is that, I say when you really put your attention on that which is ordinary, when you put your attention on it, you begin to see its extraordinary qualities. But you have to pay attention. Like this is where ritual and the creation of sacred space comes in, right? Because the thing becomes sacred because of a kind of attention that you're willing to put there. Ordinary people have the most interesting lives if you bother to ask them, but mostly that's not what we do. So I hope that answers that question.
Okay.
The ordinary is always extraordinary when you look at it, but mostly we're not looking.
That's true. Okay, part two, the second ordinary question from a different artist. They want to ask about your use of the vocabulary ordinary. Is there something that ordinary Black girls and women can bring to storytelling that maybe career artists can't or don't? Can you speak to the inclusivity of that decision?
So, when you do something, again, I just want to call our attention to sort of how ritual consistently shows up in our lives, how we live, how we talk to one another, and how anything that you do over and over again, even if it's not true, you make it real. Do you understand what I mean? Like anything you do over and over again, you make it real. So if, for example, we live in a world that's like celebrity driven, like only certain people are smart enough to write these books. Hell, ordinary people can't start no museum. You need a degree. You need, how do you know how to curate? The truth of the matter is everybody knows how to curate. We're all always curating different parts of our lives. Here at the Colored Girls Museum, we say we put the cure back in curation. Because when you really think about what curation should be doing, it should be taking care of something. It should be a conversation that aligns art and artifact in such a way that we're like, wow, I didn't hear that before. So when we talk about ordinary, what I hope, I suppose, is that we pay attention to the things that we learn to ignore. Like when you talk about career artists, right? Again, we're enrolled in whatever it is that we're doing, and we do that thing over and over again, and don't necessarily stop to imagine what it would be like if somebody else were doing that thing. like how they might do that thing differently. Somebody, I was reading something about Simone Lee, like that. Simone Lee has blown up, has she not? But if you look at the history of if you look at her trajectory, people were not paying attention to that sister at all. They considered that she was like a crafty girl and not doing anything that people were particularly interested in. What that allowed Simone Lee to do was really to develop her voice and develop her craft for herself, to really dig into her own voice, to figure out what it was that she wanted to say, that she could share. And the rest of the world caught up to her. But she was like doing her work, learning her craft, filling the void for herself. And I think, so often when you become a career anything, those kinds of questions begin to move away from you because you're creating sometimes for different reasons.
I think that's such an interesting point to end on. There have been so many interesting questions and comments in the chat, Vashti. I hope you'll spend a minute looking at them and responding and continuing the conversation. And on behalf of everyone here, thank you again for leading this symposium today as our keynote.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I'll be here, but my camera will be off.
Well, and someday soon we'll join one another again in real life.
Full time.
Yeah. So next I am going to introduce the panel discussion. We have Exploration, Experimentation, Collaboration, 25 years of the Wingate International Residency Program. And this will be a discussion with the Center for Art and Wood's current artistic director, Jennifer Nava-Milliken, and 4 panelists. Founded in 1995 as the Wingate International Turning Exchange, or ITE, this residency has become known as an annual benchmark for wood-oriented artists, makers, designers, curators, and researchers from all over the world. Leading the panel, we have Nava-Milliken, who joined the center as artistic director in 2018. Prior to arriving in Philadelphia, she worked at the Bellevue Arts Museum in Washington State, the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, and the Museum of Arts and Design in New York. Her exhibitions have been presented in museums, art fairs, galleries, and unconventional spaces, and her writings have been published in books that investigate and critique the intersecting fields of craft, art, and design. For this panel discussion, Nava has invited 4 alumni resident fellows to provide a glimpse into this unique Philadelphia-sited residency experience. Let's welcome ITE fellows Max Brosi, Stefano Catalani, Vivian Chu, and Betty Scarpino and Nava for a conversation exploring the before, during, and after experiences sparked by the ITE. This talk accompanies the center's current exhibition, marking the 25-year milestone in the history of the Wingate Residency.
Thanks, Layla, and thank you everyone here with CraftNOW Philadelphia for having us on today. It is a very auspicious moment in the history of the ITE residency program, being that the first time as we mark 25 years of the program, it is the first year that the program did not take place. So we can use this year to take a pause. We have a retrospective exhibition looking at 25 years of the residency program. And also we have the opportunity today to look ahead. Before I introduce panelists, I did want to thank a lot of people. The Center for Art and Wood, the Center for Art and Wood's co-founder and director emeritus, Albert Lekoff, who is here with us today. I want to thank all 160 plus fellows of the 25 years of the Wingate ITE residency. I want to thank the partners in the ITE program and the supporters who made it possible to continue for 25 years and onward. And of course, CraftNOW Philadelphia, also to Vashti. It's a very tough act for us to follow, but we'll do our best. And we're really pleased to be here to participate in this locus of ideas and debate. And certainly we'll be taking Vashti's words with us, particularly about radical care, radical empathy, radical vulnerability, and I would add to that radical imagination as well. From a discussion about home to a discussion that is deliberately about not being home, I want to introduce 4 former ITE fellows. If we could move on to the next slide as we introduce them. First, Max Brosi, who is an artist fellow from 2017. Max is an artist and woodturner based in Northwest Ireland. Next slide, we have Stefano Catalani, scholar fellow in 2010, and a curator, a writer, a ceramist, and executive director of Gage Academy in Seattle. Vivian Chu, who is Artist Fellow 2018, which was my first year with the center and with the program as well. Vivian is an artist and adjunct professor at Virginia Commonwealth University and joins us today from Richmond, Virginia. And Betty Scarpino, Artist Fellow in 1999 and Photojournalist Fellow in 2016. Betty is one of our very, very few, very elite group of fellows who have 2-timed the ITE program. And Betty is an artist, woodturner, and writer and editor based in Indianapolis, Indiana. So I believe we're going to include ITE accounts and bio information in the chat so that we can get started with our panel. And I'm just gonna dive into it. We do have a few images of ITE in action just to set a context. So we could start to flip through those images while we start the discussion. First off is the first brochure for the first inaugural program in 1995. And you'll see that Albert has written on the top, research, exploration, collaboration, the 3 guiding values of the program, which continue through today. So I can't see our panelists, but I know they're here. So I'm just gonna open up with a question for all of them to tackle. And that is in line with the theme of this symposium, Cultures of Making, which is also the title of the publication released last year by CraftNOW Philadelphia. What role do arts residencies play in the careers of artists and researchers? And what kind of cultures do they foster? Don't be shy.
Okay, I'll speak up first. In 1999, when I did the first residency, I was mostly working locally and connecting with my local wood turning friends and club members. And what the residency did for me was expand that culture for me, expand my understanding of what other wood turners were doing around the world, because we had somebody from France and 2 from France and 1 from Australia. When I did the residency as a photojournalist in 2016, I have a very different feeling about it because I felt as though I was bringing some of that culture instead of absorbing it as kind of a novice. I was bringing a little bit of a different culture to the ITE experience because of my now background as an editor, a writer, and as a sculptor beyond wood turning. So for me, it's changed personally, along with the ITE residency itself changing over time.
Thanks, Betty.
Well, I can jump in. There are not many residencies for scholars or curators, so this was a very welcome invitation for me to join in 2010. I think it was very humbling as an experience. As I walked into the first, as a scholar, you don't join you do not join the artist for the whole length of the residency, but it was about the last 10 days of the program. And so you arrive, and I think the culture really exists, but you have to you're walking into this sort of like big broader room where all sorts of relationships are going on, partnerships and collaborations. But it was fascinating humbling, because first of all, there's so much to learn from the artists who have spent years in refining their vision, and their relationship with the material. And there is a complete different take. All of a sudden you have to strip bare of your preconceived ideas about the material that you might have written about, or you might have analyzed from an aesthetic perspective, and actually being invited to take the gouge and get to the lathe, which is like this jet engine that is making an incredible noise, and trying to have a conversation with the material. It was incredibly eye-opening and enriching. And I've not been able to write about wood after that in the same way, meaning that now I understand the nuances and the unforgiveness of this material. And also I want to, I always think about Ezra Pound when he said that technique is the test of sincerity. And I think that's true. I think that being able to understand how the artists have developed over the years, their technique, it actually speaks of their authenticity and their sincerity. And being in their room with this amazing roster of international artists and seeing their different approaches, different cultural perspectives on a same material, it was really enriching.
Stefano, I just want to mention that when I first arrived at Bellevue Arts Museum, I think it was the very first week, I'll never forget, and I think about this all the time to this day, because now I'm at the Center for Art and Wood, but one of the first things that you recommended to me was to check out the possibilities of this residency program. And at the time I knew about the Center for Art and Wood, but I didn't know about the residency. And since then, I've really kind of made it a focus to learn about any opportunities for curators and writers in the residency space. And it remains one of the very few that offers an opportunity, particularly for embedding a curator, writer, researcher within that space of technique and action happening, and shavings, of course. And we'll get to the images that involve the creative use of shavings in all forms. And here's Stefano's work, collaborative work right here. Oh, go ahead, Stefano.
No, I mean, thank you for, for those of you who know me personally, I cook a lot and I post a lot about food. And food is about community, and craft is about community, and it's about shared experience. And so for me, it was almost natural to make pasta out of wood shavings and invite all the other artists to partake in this sculpture installation, and kind of like metaphorically give flesh to the experience of working together, at least for me, for 10 days with them. So that was really a remarkable experience for me. Yeah.
And one thing that I didn't bring up is that Stefano and Betty came into the residency before the expansion of the mission of the Center for Art and Wood. So at that time, it was still the Wood Turning Center, and very much about the use of that tool, the lathe, and the vessel, and the making of these sort of round objects turned on in access, and the creative potential behind that. And I wonder if you and Betty, and then of course Max and Vivian as well, could jump in and talk about what that change and that shift represents or has represented for the course and the evolution of the residency program, and for the Center for Wood as well.
I think it's been really great for the wood turning community. It's opened it up. It's pretty frightening for some of the older generation wood turners who haven't embraced working beyond the roundness of the lathe. I had that concept to begin with, wanting to do something besides turn a round object. And so I was helping move the field, and also being part of that movement, having it affected me. I think it's enriched it a lot, changed the culture from old white guys working on the lathe to a more inclusive aspect of who gets to be one of the residents and what the kind of work that gets done.
Thank you. I definitely want to loop back into that discussion as we get into the course of the conversation. But I also would like to invite Vivian and Max, who came in after the expansion of the organization in the Center for Art and Wood, and perhaps that was a very different experience for you, or perhaps not. Max is a wood turner, and then of course Vivian as a sculptural artist.
I thought Max wanted to talk. I thought, so your first question about the culture of the ITE, which leads back into the expansion of the program to be more inclusive. I think what is special about the ITE program is the diversity. When I was there, we had different demographics in race, in gender, in age, which I think was really important. And just the idea of having a scholar as well as a student resident and then a photojournalist resident really kind of pushed a sharing and allowed us all to really push our own work to include new ideas and techniques that we learned there. I'm actually doing some turning now, thinking back to how I was, dabbling a little bit at the ITE and meeting a lot of people in Philadelphia. Like the wood community has been really great, especially during this time when a lot of us are teachers and we're trying to share how to possibly teach woodworking online. So I think the sharing is really important. And then I was currently in a grad program while I was at the ITE, which was interdisciplinary. And I had done a lot of residencies, which were mostly sculptural based or a wood area as part of a larger residency program. So this was really the one program that was niche for woodworkers that allowed all of us to share common ground and specific knowledge that other residencies wouldn't have talked about, like finish or, just kind of nerding out on woodworking. And that was really great having all those different demographics there. So that was a great residency for me. And talking with you, Nava, since you are a scholar and have a lot of ideas of how to push the woodworking and craft forward. So that was really helpful.
Well, thanks, Vivian. I'm certainly enriched every single day from the existence of this program.
Could I come in there?
Please do.
Hi. Okay, for me, from my perspective, I'm an only child that grew up in the northwest of Ireland in a very rural community, and my studio or my workshop is at the side of my house. I look out over valleys and mountains and trees and so on. You come and live and meet the collectors, meet fellow artists, exchange ideas and collaborate with them. That to me was probably the main strength of the residency.
Thank you for that. And I'm glad that you could join us today. And thank you for wearing your Center for Art and Wood t-shirt. I want to go back to this idea that Vivian brought up of the balance between specificity of the material and then a universality of voices that comes from having people working in different practices, including those on the production wood turning side or functional craft side, as well as those who are working maybe in fields like architecture or sculpture or new media, but still coming together through the context of making and material. So what kinds of discussions or what kind of challenges that bring to you, or the complexity does that bring to you when you think about your own work?
Well, I currently teach furniture design here at VCU, and I do not make furniture at all. And when I was at ITE, we had Michael Purier, who was making furniture. We had Cha Jong Ray, who was making sculpture, and I was making more sculptural things. And it was really, you know, we were pushing each other to do other things other than what we're doing now. And I think the amount of time we were there really pushed collaboration. I don't know if you showed, but we turned corn on the cob on the lathe, you know, so we're just having fun and experimenting with a lot of things without really the pressure to create anything. That being said, the great thing about the residency was that there was an exhibition at the end, which was really open to all our kind of experimental works. That's kind of different from other exhibitions that have a lot of pressure to kind of show who you are as an artist. This really kind of focused on the residency and not, you know, the art and you know, final projects, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think one aspect of the question was how does this kind of multiplicity of voices joined together by one material, how does that color the conversations that are had? And then maybe, and I'm referring to some correspondence that we had between us in email about how questions of craft and the way it's traditionally been assigned hierarchies in terms in the wider scope of arts and making, how does the way the residency has evolved and taken shape, has that provided opportunities for artists working in traditional craft fields to think differently about their work, or has it solidified the way they see their work in terms of the use of the material of wood and heritage practices or techniques of making?
Well, when you invoke the word wood, I think people who aren't familiar with working with wood, just, I'm not sure what they think, maybe a wooden table, some wooden structure for a home. But when a person actually delves into wood itself and explores the material beyond what our preconceived ideas are, that opens up possibilities. And as far as the academic part of it, for the most part, wood, especially wood turning, has not been based in an academic setting until very, very recently. And so when somebody says, well, I'm a ceramic artist, we understand that academically from universities and art programs. We don't necessarily understand that about wood. So what kind of wood do we have? A wood artist or a wood turner, furniture maker in an academic setting. So the center focusing on wood can expand that understanding and knowledge of what that word means to a variety of different people.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Betty. I think wood is a material that is very versatile and historically has been associated with construction, making home, serving food, building stretchers for the sick. I think has been used to make containers. But I think that such a richness of associations is something that I felt, at least when I was in 2010, the ITE residency was there, because not all the artists that were included at that time were actually wood turners. I think Wonjo Park, South Korean artist, was a sculptor, and she was actually gluing together painstakingly these little bits of wood to make incredible frames that were slightly off, that were not square, that for an OCD would have been crazy to look at. But her process was so meticulous and so repetitious, to a point almost becoming a Zen mantra, that was actually healing, I think, for and would be very healing today in this climate, to keep our minds off other news. So I don't know, I think I agree with Betty. I think that wood not necessarily is related to wood turning. It's not the first thing probably that people would think of. Design as, use wood for creating many objects. So I think that expanding the mission and not limiting the experience of the ITE to wood turning actually just recognizes that richness and that versatility and that expansive field of uses and techniques.
Thank you.
Nava, can I jump in there for
I
a second?
will. Yes, thank you.
Great. I should explain, I think through wood, and I express myself through wood, through working with wood in all different guises. And I was quite lucky when I started off in wood turning that I stumbled across quite, I guess I could say, different and sculptural narrative. And I'd go as far as to say, it was the interconnection of cylinders at all different angles to express social concepts about society and terrorism and so on. And I have to say, after a while, it tired me out using that medium as such a narrative. And going into the ITE, one of the things I wanted to do was take it back a step. Maybe I went at this in the reverse direction that most people would. They'd start with something quite basic and build up to sculpture after years or whatever. I did it the other way. And I remember saying to Albert, I want to actually calm things down and see wood and see my practice almost as a meditation, making simple things like the world is quite crazy at the moment, as we all know. And applying intellectual concepts to my sculpture, it kind of tired me out and it made me feel, tired. So what I wanted to do was make something that's much more instinctive and beautiful. And people will probably laugh. I went to the vessel, which is what everyone associates with wood turning. And I spent the next 3 years after the ITE trying to put my own stamp on the vessel and make the vessel my own. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but I've tried to tie it into the evolution of the center and how, I suppose, the center evolving has made me evolve as well.
That's really, I'm finding that fascinating to hear that, Max, because I, as one person, really didn't understand what you were doing during that ITE experience, because I really love your cylinders and how they're connected and how they speak of the wider audience politically, especially. And then you do this ITE experience and you start making vessels again. I did not understand that. And so I'm glad to hear your explanation. But if anybody hasn't seen Max's pre-ITE work, I hope that you go to his website and take a look at some of the work that he did, because it's pretty powerful and speaks to our political situation today.
Thanks, Betty. I will also mention that you can come see it at the Center for Art and Wood, because the exhibition opened last week or the week before, and it's viewable online as well as on site. And so we're really very privileged to bring it into the public space again in this discussion. But also it is poignant what you mentioned, Max, about coming to the residency and having, being in the incongruously bustling, probably very sweaty city of Philadelphia, in the center of it, and taking the opportunity to create space of thinking around your work, and then return to the sort of more meditative aspects of practice. Usually, it like Betty mentioned, it goes the other way, that work becomes a little. It becomes an experience of kind of fragmenting the way that you think about your work and you think through your practice. And then, and there are many examples in the exhibition as well, where we have a section called Breakthroughs, and that's where somebody who has been creating the same type of work comes out of the residency completely changing that way of working. So I'm glad to know that it happens on the continuum as well.
It does, and in my case, in reverse order. But I just felt what I needed personally as an artist, and I think what the world needed was more calm rather than more analyzing, analytical, intellectual sculpture. I mean, those pebble vessels that I'm making now, they're carved. The carved texture to me reflects art. So they're, like you said, very meditative and quiet and calm. That was my intention, because that's what was missing from my life. So sorry to make this about me. Sorry, back to you.
But the culture of the residency itself allows for that. We don't have to do anything in particular when we go into the residency. Like, you have to make new work, you can go back and make older work.
And I think that's really what the humbling part for me was. I think a lot of scholars, and especially craft academicians, often approach a medium or a craft with specific ideas that have been built in over years of studies and readings and discussions within the discourse of the field. I think instead, having that full immersion and direct, unfiltered experience with the material, especially if you get a gouge and you have to say, okay, now try to work on this lathe and on this piece of wood, and experiencing the conversations, collaborations, explorations that are happening within the workshop. I think what it did for me, it completely deflated those preconceived ideas that were sort of a frame of reference for me to approach the medium, approach the work of the artist. And so I think that's incredibly beneficial. I don't want to make an inflammatory statement here, although probably you would like that, but I think that this residency for me was really about taking down some preconceived approaches to what the medium would have to mean or would have to be interpreted as. And so it really it was an unfiltered, raw exposure to understanding visually, emotionally, radically the medium, but also through the collaborations and the discussions with the fellow colleagues who were there, the artists, and realizing my maybe well-read knowledge of the medium from all the articles and essays read over the years, but my very poor basic knowledge of the medium in itself. So those negotiations were really critical for me on a personal level.
I guess that's another example of the uniqueness of this program, is that not only does it offer a fellowship position for curators and writers, but it also encourages curators and writers to get their hands dirty in the proverbial sense, but also in the literal sense. And so I don't know if everyone takes advantage of that opportunity, but it is certainly important for understanding the process of creation, the process of working through a technique. I want to invite people in the audience to submit your questions in the chat, and I will dance back and forth if you have questions for the panelists or about the program. But I do want to devote a little bit of time to the city of Philadelphia, where this place-based residency occurs. It is not your typical bucolic pastoral escape. It is really putting 7 artists in very close quarters into the center of the city, which has been reported to me in various times as being loud, chaotic, energetic, frenetic. And then artists are in the residency for 8 weeks. And as Vivian mentioned, there is an exhibition at the end of it. So there is constant pressure to create something that is exhibition ready. So how does this, I don't know, fuel your work or your thinking through your work while you're on the residency?
Well, I'd like to just mention that in 1999, the residency was at the George School, which was in rural Bucks County, and we used a high school wood shop, and the 5 of us, the 4 artists and then the photojournalists, stayed in a farmhouse together and cooked meals together. And we had the grounds to walk on. I think I felt more pressured by that than I did in 1999 when I was at the residency, because it was downtown. It was at the University of the Arts, which I really enjoyed because it brought more enthusiasm for me and helped energize my work and made me feel more connected than having it be in a bucolic setting. And yes, it was loud and it was noisy, but I never lived in a downtown like that. And I knew I would eventually get to go home, but I enjoyed it. It's energizing.
Vivian, you had mentioned the exhibition, so I'd love to hear your description of that process and preparing for it.
Well, about being in the city, I'm from Hong Kong, so I grew up in the city, and I never thought it was possible to kind of be an artist in the city. So it was kind of like, it can happen. But it was also sometimes the bucolic nature can be distracting. So it was very much like, I guess we're going to work now for the whole day. So that was actually great for me. And we also had a lot of field trips. We went to Nakashima's workshop, and we saw some collectors in DC, which was really great, and Mark Spheri's studio. So it wasn't all city and working. The exhibition was great because as an artist who does a lot of residencies, I don't show very much. So it was a good opportunity for me to show work and really kind of get back into niche woodworking. As I said, I was in a grad program at that time, and I had some pressure to kind of move away from woodworking because it was so interdisciplinary. So it kind of allowed me to kind of get back to the roots of my work. And I actually did, the image you saw, Inclination, was a kind of expanding from work I did back in 2010. So I was really allowed to do kind of remake some of that work. The exhibition space is large, and aside from the residency exhibitions, the programming at the Center for Art and Wood is great. There's a lot of space, and there is a collection upstairs, a library of work that previous wood artists have done. So, and that was always available to us for inspiration. So we would always come and look at what other people have done and kind of expand our kind of encyclopedia of artists who are working in the same field. So that was always great. And yeah, it was just like a great network of meeting a lot of local artists, and it was right by the Clay Center too. So it was very good for kind of understanding the scene in Philadelphia and how open everyone is to sharing. Yeah.
I do want to mention that there are a couple of other fellows who are not on this panel but are with us today. So I definitely welcome their insights as well. Elizabeth and Jennifer Zwilling, I'm thinking about you. And also Albert, I'd love to hear from Albert today as well. I did want to jump back to something that came up earlier and discussing access. The residency is one of the most subsidized residencies that I'm aware of. On the other hand, there is still a divide in who can participate in an arts residency and who can't, for a number of reasons. First of all, being able to be released for 2 months of time and just ability to get away. And so I constantly occupied with this question of how do we do better in making the residency available to a wider scope of artists in this field.
Could I jump in there, Nava?
You do not have to.
No, but maybe somebody else wants to. No, but what I'm thinking is, I'm not sure you can do better, because aside from it almost getting me kicked out of the house and sleeping on the couch for a year afterwards. Everything was provided on the residency. Foreign travel was provided, pressure was removed. You're in a space where you have no domestic chores to do, you have no rent to pay as such because you're put up in the student digs. You really have that headspace and the physical space to think about work and create work. And you mentioned earlier about the pressure of the exhibition. I remember clearly Albert saying to me, Max, you're not under any pressure. If you come into the exhibition and you tip out a big bag of shavings at the end of the residency, I'm happy as long as your horizons have expanded and you've had new thoughts. And I was a bit disappointed with myself going home because, like Betty alluded to, before that I'd been doing very much kind of narrative sculptural pieces, and here I'd produced a body of vessels, and I was thinking, Max, was that a bit of a cop-out? Did you not go far enough, and so on? But again, Albert said, don't worry about that. It's a year, it's 2 years down the line when the impact of the ITE is going to leak its way out of your brain into your sketchbooks and onto your lathe. And that has happened.
Yes.
That's really true, since I'm turning right now, and I haven't done that since the ITE.
And in your cohort, the Shajongwe turned for the very first time, and that work is actually in the center's permanent collection, and it's on view in the exhibition as well. And we were just speaking about it today with the staff and how beautiful it is. Those bursts of inspiration that come from hands to material are just snapshots that are very, very important and offer us insights and our community's insights, because of course that collection is in our public trust.
I think it's also important to note that the center works pretty hard to create an international exchange. So Cha Jung-rae is from Korea, our scholar. Sean was from Scotland. Ireland. I'm from Hong Kong. So it really kind of showed us what people are doing with wood internationally.
That's a very important aspect of this program, absolutely. I want to be sure that we end, or at least touch on the aspect of what it means to take this with us and respond to the idea of residencies in this time. This has been a very revealing year for us in many ways. I mentioned earlier that this is the first year in the residency's history that it hasn't taken place. And so here and now we're having this conversation about place and being removed and bringing your practice to another place. Is being through or in the midst of this situation in 2020, how do we connect with thinking about being in different places and experiences in a post-COVID, post-2020 world?
Well, of course, through symposiums like this, getting together with like-minded people to share our life stories and to hear other people's enthusiasm and excitement. So I think these Zoom sessions they are and they have been very important to me in connecting to the outside world, because I'm pretty socially isolated right now. So I just think this internet connection is essential.
A lifeline.
I think that, oh, pardon me.
No, go ahead.
No, I think actually that these conversations, especially these symposia that take place over the online platform, actually are much more inclusive than symposia that would, before COVID, allow people to travel to a city for the conference, but also had limitations in terms of accessibility, and not every student, not every artist or would possibly have the means to find lodging and then transportation. And I think that I'm hoping that this new paradigm of coming around the table virtually, like we're doing now, to engage in conversations, will remain after, even well after the pandemic is behind us, hopefully, or definitely will be something that I would love to continue, even on a personal practice, to engage with, just because I believe that it is a way to really bypass barriers that exist, no matter what, when we are gathering in one place.
Well, I tell you, the woodturners have that figured out. The American Association of Woodturners, their virtual conference in June was very well attended, and by many people who would not have been able to go in person. And then last weekend, David Ellsworth, who was one of the elders of the turning field, he did an online Zoom session. I think it was maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours long. There were 1,700 people who signed up and attended that session. And many of them would not ever have been able to go and see David in person, but they could talk to him and see him sort of live right there on their screen. We also have a website that is dedicated to teaching people how to use, to record themselves with video, to share themselves with the right kind of equipment, computers, programs. It's called Lucid Woodturners. If you ever want to know anything about how to connect virtually, you go to their website, you join them, and any question will be answered. So the woodturners, the woodworkers are leading the field with virtual presentations and connections.
Yes, yeah, we have a lot to learn.
Oh, and they charge, the AEW, they charge $10 a piece to come and see David Ellsworth. 1,700 people showed up. That's a lot of money into their coffers to help other kinds of programming. So it can be done and help foster and create connections for the future.
Does it make sense to think about residencies as being mergers of these kinds of tools and opportunities that take place in a space, but also in a universal space?
I think the world's a rapidly changing place, and as everybody's mentioned already, there are so many advantages to digital symposia and so on. And I've attended a few, but I also teach in a local college here, and we were faced with the concept of having to teach online, and nothing made me more scared than that, because as I mentioned, I communicate through wood. I'm a touchy-feely person. I like the feeling and the smell and sometimes even the taste of the materials. So what all this has done for me, it made me long to get to the physical demonstrations and symposia and residencies more and more and more.
Yeah, that's poignant. Certainly, we have learned that navigating that bridge between sharing space with artwork and viewing it on digital space there's still that gap there. But I thank you so much, everyone, for coming together. It's been a pleasure to see you all here. It's definitely colliding different parts of my life and different eras in my life, as well as in the centers and in the history of the residency. So I thank you so much, everyone, for your comments. I do want to mention one comment that's in the chat, and that is from Jennifer Zwilling, who was the scholar in 2000, I want to say 14, I might be wrong about that. And she wrote that Betty's comment made her think of Vashti's point that in order to be universal, we must be specific, and that we must share ourselves in order to connect with others. And I think that's the perfect note to end on. So thank you so much, and thank you, CraftNOW, for giving us this platform to talk about the Wingate ITE residency program.
Good to be here. Thanks, everybody.
Be safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you from Ireland.
Thanks, Max.
Thank you all so much. We're going to move on to our last presentation of the afternoon. And I invite you all to remember to put your questions in the chat box to share. Our last presentation is on patriotism and oikophobia with John Prius and Christine Pfister of Pentimenti Gallery. John Prius's work focuses on the relationship between the material and the social, and how the objects that surround us obscure and reveal our histories. Prius has been working with a warehouse full of materials collected from closed Chicago public schools as a way to entangle the mundane and domestic with the more abstract relationships we have to strangers through politics and social policy. His collaborative projects often invite broad participation and, when possible, include an educational dimension, such as working with youth apprentices or Chicago public school students. His work is on view this month at Pentimenti Gallery here in Philadelphia, a gallery known for featuring content-driven contemporary art. The gallery's represented artists regularly participate in international museum exhibitions and biennials and are included in leading institutional collections as well as private collections worldwide. Since 1995, Christine Pfister has been the co-owner and director of Pentimenti Gallery and has participated in lectures on art at institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania, the American Association of Museums, Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, Maryland Institute College of Art, among many more. Christine, I will turn the mic over to you.
Yes, thank you, Leila. I'm Christine Pfister, and I'm the owner and director at Pentimenti Gallery. Today, I have the great pleasure to have with me John Prius. At Pentimenti, we are welcoming the fall season with solo exhibition of John, a State of the Union, and the show will continue to January 23rd, 2021. But before, I would like to thank CraftNOW, the Philadelphia Museums, and Techne for inviting us to participate in the celebration of culture of making. It is our first year joining CraftNOW, and I would be delighted to give you a quick run through our programs at the gallery. As Leila mentions, we feature contemporary art that challenges traditional material and aesthetics by a line of internationally established artists alongside up-and-coming talents. Since our founding in 1992, Pentimenti Gallery has gained national recognitions by maintaining a commitment to process-based work and elaborate craftsmanship. Can we change the slide? Thank you. Our time, the exhibitions program has expanded from abstract to figurative aesthetics to innovative work created from unconventional materials, such as packaging tape, marine vinyl, or unbranded X-rays. Next slide. Every year, the gallery is invited to participate in international art fairs. And in 2019, the gallery participated in Art Miami. During the Art Basel Week in Miami, we presented a group exhibition at our booth. And on this image, you can see 3 cubes from John's from the Chicago Archive series Infinite Sets. Next slide. And the other fair as well that we participated in was Volta Basel, Switzerland. And during the Art Week, we had the pleasure to feature a solo booth with the sculpture of Ted Larson. Next slide. Early this year, we launched online platform designed to present exclusive exhibitions as well as promote transparent and informed access to rare to market and significant work by our represented artists. What you can find on Pentimenti Warehouse is a series of exclusive work by Michal Fargo, ceramics, paintings, and works on paper by Kevin Finkley or Eric Spain, or ceramics again by Lauren Mabry with many other works. Next slide. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to John Prius. For the past decades, John interdisciplinary art practice has poetically investigated and sparkled dialogues about contemporary social, political, civic, and labor structures. Maybe a quick run through, a few words. John holds a MFA from the University of Chicago. He has been the recipient of the Smart Museum Commission Grant and the Chicago Cultural Center Taste of Chicago Project Award. This is for his most recent award. His work is held within the permanent collection of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and he is represented by Pentimenti Gallery, Rona Hoffman Gallery in Chicago, and Rena Branston Gallery in San Francisco. So this is my great pleasure to introduce you to John. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll switch a mask.
Mask switching. So thank you, Christine, for inviting me, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present my work to this forum. It's really interesting to see what other people are doing. So I'll say switch. I'm just going to run through some slides of my work. And the slide that you see here has been the basis of my work, both as an artist and maker, contractor, collaborator, since about 2013, when Chicago closed 49 public schools at the same time. So there's a lot of upheaval in Chicago around this this event, and during the tenure of Rahm Emanuel. And at the time, I had a relationship with the city that gave me access to all this furniture that was going to be taken to the landfill. There was a lot of material got sent to other schools, but there was a lot of stuff that they didn't have any use for. Material that went back to the 50s, early 50s, all the way through the 80s and 90s. So, you know, solid wood, oak tables and things like that. So at the time I was working with, actually switch slides, please. So this is just a shot into the warehouse where all this, it was about an 800-foot warehouse full of stuff, floor to ceiling, that was all bound for the landfill. So all of the work that I'm going to talk about is based on this body of material. Next slide, please. So prior to the large-scale closing, there was one school that was closed, and at the time I was working with artist Theaster Gates, and he and I had been working together for quite a few years by that point, and I was called by someone from the schools that said they had to clear one building out, and I had access to a whole building that had become a sort of warehouse for all of these other South Side public schools. So Theaster Gates and I took about 4 semi-loads of stuff out of this school before it was torn down, and made work out of that material. And at the time, he and I had been in conversations about, I was sort of taking a backseat in my own practice and working to build up his studio, hiring. So I was running the studio and running a apprenticeship, informal apprenticeship program with kids, young makers and artists, or people that wanted to be artists, so that we'd come in and work. I'd be guiding these young folks on making work for me and for Theaster. And then as he got super famous, he got interested in other things, and the apprenticeship dimension of his practice became less interesting to him. So my work diverged from his at that point. Next slide, please. So this is in 2014. There's a project called The Beast at the Hyde Park Arts Center. And this is maybe the project where I feel like the most ideas of interest to me all convened into one form. So this is looking at the Beast from one end of the Hyde Park Arts Center. As you can see on the right, there are garage doors that open up onto the street. Next slide, please. So this is the interior of that bull form, which became a social hub, event space. We did talks in there, musical performances. And the main thing was encouraging local youth to use the space as a programming area for whatever they wanted to do. So they started a very successful open mic night that ran, I think, every couple of weeks. So this is a photograph of that event. And it was the idea that's, I think, part of what's interesting to me about that particular material is it's, I mean, as all things are, it's embedded with history, but it has a somewhat political charge to it based on the history of the schools in Chicago, based on the upheavals of the closings. So it's sort of drenched in pathos in a way. And I was imagining so the interior of the Beast, if you can see behind all, to the left there, those are all school tabletops that form the backdrop of the interior of the space. And maybe put simply, the idea of how is it that we collectively engage with past traumas and embed them in our ideas of the future. And one could, I guess a lot of the work that I've done since is thinking about that idea from different perspectives. Next slide. This is just another shot of some activity in the Beast. Next. And then more recently, I've done other projects that I try to build in some apprenticeship aspect to it. And part of what's been interesting is how much of a struggle it is for that process to work and maintain itself. And but in this case, I had a show at the Michael Kohler Art Center in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and I had an apprentice work with me, a former CPS student named Kendall Hill. So he was helping me build these stoops, I called them, or like a combination of staircase, you know, the front stoop being this, in a sense, social interface between your private and public life, but imagined as a piece of furniture. So I made a series of those for this exhibition that then became the seating for the exhibition, for congregating. Next slide, please. Shot of Kendall at work. Next. So those are the stoops in an exhibition at the Sullivan Gallery at the School of the Art Institute inside of a projection room. Next. So this is at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. You can see on the right back corner, there's a whole bunch of teachers' desks that were arranged to be the backdrop for a stage. And then there were this show, it's called The Freedom Principle, and it was investigating the relationship between experimental music and art in Chicago, focused particularly on the AACM, which I can't remember what that stands for, but there were a bunch of presentations and musical performances that would happen on that stage. Next. And this was another version of the same idea at the Chicago Cultural. It was the Taste of Chicago Pavilion by the Chicago Cultural Center. So I invited artists from Chicago to make these seating modules, cubes, which I call the Chicago Archive Series. I think of them in a way as collections of material into this square form that then becomes seating in a sort of module for collecting waste material of one kind or another. So there ended up being 100 cubes for the tent, and then an image of mine based on Chicago blueprints became the sides of the tent. Next slide, please. So there you can see the tent sides. Next. So a lot of the work is, I think there's some, I don't know how to describe it exactly, a relationship between functionality and, let me rephrase that. So, it didn't start out as a kind of a deliberate objective, but a lot of the work, the more I work with this material, the more it starts to take on somewhat landscape-like quality. So I have a set of objects in this exhibition, for instance, that I call shards, that are the material kind of put together into the form of like some kind of a landscape piece, a piece of stone or something like that. And you can see it a little bit in this lamp and table. And I think there was a quote a long time ago that I read from William Kentridge. It's in one of his animated pieces where there was a scene where a person gets shot and dies, and the landscape just covers over the body and becomes a stone. And I think there's a way in which, you know, the landscape is constantly obscuring history. And I think there's a way in which the materials that we use has that same capacity to obscure what's happened before and where this material came from. And I imagine, you know, so I imagine them as these sort of landscape elements that end up in our personal lives that we kind of forget what they are and where they came from. Next slide, please. So this is a Rena Branston exhibition, I think in Miami, where a table and the Chicago Archive cubes became seating for people that would come in and look at her booth. Next. There's another exhibition in Chicago. This was a commission of a table and chairs that ended up in an Artist Friends collection. Next. This is out at the, so this became the lobby entry space into this, the Chicago Biennial, which is held outside of Chicago, and I'm now forgetting the name of museum. So again, it becomes this meeting space. There's a couple swing sets in there made out of school chairs and desks. So I feel like I'm trying to bring in this element of education, playfulness, public interface. Next. It's a recent piece, a rocking chair and lamp and carpet. Next. Then I included just a handful of more traditional domestic spaces. So this is a kitchen I did. This isn't with the school material. It was prior to that, working with that material. But it's just to show that also with that material, it gets built into somewhat more traditional contract projects, functional spaces. Next. So in this case, it's a buffet, and that's all pretty much 100% school material. Next. Same here, this is another kitchen island, Chicago. Next. Set of bookshelves. Next. How am I doing for time?
Good.
5 minutes, okay. So this was another big collaborative project that I did. It's called Infinite Games. So this is a group of Chicago artists that came, I invited, because there were 50-ish schools closed, I invited 50 artists, designers, or art collaborations to respond to the material. Because the question started to become more pressing to me. Like I'm just some random artist that has access to all of this stuff. And the stuff from the schools is, it's an important body of material that I didn't feel like I was, I mean, practically speaking, I was never going to use it all myself. And I was really curious what other people would do with it. So I ended up inviting artists to come to the space, choose material that they wanted out of the space or respond to it in some way. And then the results of that exhibition were shown in a domestic space, like a short-term rental where all of these pieces were built in. So I have some photos of that, a handful of them. Okay, next please. So this is one of the apartments in this space, and there's work by Parsons and Charlesworth. The chair shelf, the clock is by Misha Khan, artist in New York, or designer. Ceramic pieces by Mike Baker, Chicago artist. Next, please. And this was a work by a Chicago artist named Inigo Manglano Ovalle, who took a chair, burned the chair, used the carbon from the burn to make ink, which he then used to print a photograph of the chair that was burned. The piece is just called Ink. Next. These are a couple pieces that are in the show here, also by an artist, photographer, multidisciplinary artist named Alberto Aguilar. And I collaborated with him by building the frames for the images that he took. He dragged the furniture all over the country with him and then would photograph it in these various settings around the country and then leave it there often. It's called the Left Behind series. Next. This is Rahm Emanuel's address. Artist Jason Lazarus is calling out Rahm Emanuel for the school closings. And again, this was a collaboration where Lazarus It was his idea, and then we fabricated the work in my shop with some young apprentices in that case as well. Next. This is a clock called The Loner by Nisha Khan. Next. I'll skip this one, it's a video. So one of my favorite pieces, artist named Karen Reimer, who took photographs of markings on the bottoms of chairs and tables and then had those embroidered into cushions that became the seating, or were on the chairs around one of the dining tables. Next. This is a more recent project where I worked with a group of 20 kids to deconstruct school material, which was then built into an installation at the University of Chicago through the Smart Museum. Next. So that's the installation at the School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. Next. In use at the Harris School. Next. That's my last show here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Shot of that.
That was actually your first exhibition in Philadelphia.
Yes.
Actually. So,
yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's maybe you want to say a few words with the installation, the image.
Yeah. I think I've got like 3.
Okay.
Should we?
Yeah, we can. Yeah,
question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead. We can skip. Yeah.
Okay, next one. I've done a series of works with blueprints from the schools. I got a roll of blueprints from one of the janitor's closets at a school that was going to be torn down. So I built frames for them out of school material. Next. So another rocking chair. Next. Next. Close-up of one of the cubes, Chicago Archive series. Next. And this is the shard that's debuting at the exhibition behind us. You see it sitting over there. Next. Also in the show right here. Next. And in the show over there. I think that's it. So thank you.
Thank you for giving us a window into your practice, and the show is opening at Pentimenti. I do know there is going to be limited space for a walking tour coming up with the Center for Art and Wood and Clay Studio and Pentimenti. Is that?
Yes, it's correct. It's going to be tomorrow afternoon. We have time slot at 2, 2:45, and 3:30, and the meeting location is at Pentimenti Gallery. So we'll have the artists present to introduce their work. The tour is limited to 4 people.
Jen says there are 4 spots open. You have three
time slot. We have one at 2, one at 2:45, and one at 3:30.
And anyone interested in joining you can, how do they sign on?
Yeah, there is, Jennifer is actually posting the information on the chat right now. I can see it. So you can directly sign up for the tour and sign up. You can pick your time, but the immediate place will be at Pentimenti Gallery. And from Pentimenti Gallery, we'll move to the Clay Studio and go further. Yes.
Perfect. Elizabeth, I don't know if you tracked any questions. We can open up for any question and answer and concluding remarks. What an amazing afternoon. I know I'm glad that I spent a few hours away from the news cycle this afternoon and thinking about craft and our communities and what's happening here in the city and beyond. So thank you everyone so much for being here this afternoon with us. We knew it was going to be a challenge, but we also wanted to dedicate some time and space for being together. So again, thank you all.
There was one question, Layla, for John. It was from Catherine Pennypacker. It's what are the stoops covered with? And I know you talked about your process, but I'm not sure you answered that direct question.
Variety of materials. So I think I did 7 of them in total. And let's see, some of them were school material. Some of it was, I also, when I see a leather couch in the alley, I cut the leather off and then use that for upholstery. There was one that was covered with clothing that was outgrown by my kids. One of them covered with an old quilt that I don't use anymore. So a wide variety of materials.
Thank you. That was really the only question we had for you and for Christine. And thank you so much for opening your gallery up to us today, Christine, and for John for elaborating about your practice. And your work is beautiful. And I love the engagement with the public school system. It's fabulous.
There is one question that lends itself to asking about the school system. The material seems to have specific political meaning in the Chicago context. Does that meaning change or get lost as the pieces circulate? I don't know, John, if you have had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it does. It has a specific charge in Chicago, definitely, that becomes more abstract, I think, the further you get away from Chicago. But I feel like the kind of general charge of the material remains as, I mean, I guess the fact that they were closed in that way and all at once, and that it became such a political hot, it might have something to do with why he lost the next election. I think it did. So it has a very specific charge there, whereas school closings generally, I think, always have somewhat of a charge, but it doesn't take on that same specificity. But I mean, I don't, you know, my sense is that it travels. People seem interested in the what the materials are in other contexts outside of Chicago that may not have any familiarity with the specifics of that story.
Another question slipped in that as I was talking before. Could you speak, John, about how ritual as a concept is part or not part of your process?
I mean, I guess I think of, I mean, there's a way to think of ritual as a sort of formalized practice versus just something you do all the time and that becomes part of your daily habitual activity. You know, I haven't given a ton of thought to how it functions for me as ritual. Yeah, so I don't have a specific answer to that question in my own practice.
Fair enough. So if there aren't any other questions that might pop in the next second or two, I'll just make some remarks. So that concludes the presentation portion of today's symposium. I'd like to share a virtual round of applause as we all transition over to, you know, when we did the questions and answers. So we monitored our questions, excuse me, and I'd like to thank you again that we've truly enjoyed spending this afternoon with all of you and last week's program as well. Please remember to visit the Philadelphia Museum of Art's craft show as well as craftnowphiladelphia.org to learn more about their work and advocacy. If you're interested in learning more about craft or joining the museum's vibrant programming, and perhaps you'd like to become a member of our friends group, TechNay, the Ambassadors for International Craft, I'm going to pin a link to that as well in the chat. Otherwise, Layla and I'd like to invite you all to unmute yourselves for a minute to say hello, and let's have a little ruckus, if you will. We can, shout out questions and hoot and holler if we need to. But I just want to thank you again for joining us and supporting us by being present this afternoon and last week as well. And we hope to see you next year. So thank you very, very much.